Supreme Court rules Alabama execution will go on without Muslim spiritual advisor Al.com. The execution of Dominic Hakim Marcel Ray for the 1995 slaying of a 15-year-old Selma girl will proceed after the U.S. Supreme Court lifted a federal appeals court stay based on the inmate's request to have his Muslim spiritual advisor at his side when he dies. Ray's execution by lethal injection was set for 6 p.m. at Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore. The U.S. His death sentence comes 20 years after being put on death row, and also while he's also serving time for the killings of 2 teenage boys who were slain the year before Tiffany Harville was fatally stabbed. For those killing, update at 8:05 p.m. The U.S. Supreme Kagan issued a dissenting opinion. Under the state's the opinion states, here, Ray has put forward a powerful claim that his religious rights will be violated at the moment the state puts him to death. The 11th Circuit, update at 6:30 p.m. ADOC for breakfast, he had milk, eggs, jelly, prunes, 2 biscuits, and potatoes. Ray refused. The original story continues below. Days before the scheduled execution, Ray is at the center of several legal battles. An appeal in motion for a stay of execution is pending before the U.S. Supreme Court, after the U.S. 11th Circuit Court of Appeals on Wednesday. Both Ray's attorneys filed a federal lawsuit last week claiming Ray's religious freedom was being violated because the Alabama Department of Corrections would not allow his Muslim spiritual advisor, or imam, to be in the execution chamber. Officials told Bob Horton, spokesperson for the ADOC, said the department follows protocol regardless of the chaplain's spiritual belief or that of the inmate. Horton said the Chief U.S. District Judge Keith Watkins of the Middle District of Alabama and issued an order the next day. Ray's lawyers from the Federal Defenders for the Middle District of Alabama appealed Watkins' ruling to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and Wednesday the appeals court, writing in its order notably.
Raindrop, drop top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.